Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Charles Taylor here, and tonight we delve into the historic 1931 Antarctic mobilization that arose in the wake of the tragic Palmer Land expedition and the subsequent military conflict that unfolded across the frozen continent as American and British forces were deployed in large numbers to contain and eradicate the emerging threat. Join us as we explore how these meticulously planned operations evolved into a full-scale conflict, driven by the relentless mechanized threats of the past and the strategic ingenuity of the Joint Task Force. Operation Snowstorm marked one of the most significant military deployments of the early 20th century. Over 15,000 British and American troops were mobilized, supported by nearly 200 mechanized units and a fleet of 25 naval vessels. The task force faced the dual challenge of containing the growing threat beneath Antarctica while operating in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The landscape they confronted was brutal. Blizzards rolled in without warning, temperatures regularly plunged to lethal lows, and ice fields stretched out as far as the eye could see. Yet the Joint Task Force was ready. American and British forces swiftly established fortified bases along the shoreline, securing key positions around the now sealed sinkhole near Mount Stevenson. These installations were strategically positioned to allow rapid access to the subterranean tunnels beneath them, while maintaining control of the perimeter. The task force established a network of trenches dug with repurposed trench digger automatons and stretched in half-mile intervals, forming a vast ring of defense around their positions. The trench diggers, modified from industrial construction models, tore through the snow and ice, creating deep fortifications in preparation for whatever might emerge. These trenches served as the first line of defense for infantry forces, allowing them to remain concealed and protected from the harsh elements as they awaited further orders. Small heat generators were dotted along the trench lines, providing essential warmth in the frigid Antarctic environment. These generators created temporary warm zones where troops could regroup and prepare for combat, ensuring operational efficiency despite the extreme cold. In addition to the infantry, the mechanized elements of the task force played a pivotal role in establishing and maintaining control over the icy terrain. The United States deployed their newly developed M3 Ice Walker units, four-legged machines designed specifically for the harsh conditions of Antarctica. The British were also testing a newer military model and the pride of Iron Helm Automata, the Mark V Behemoth. A smaller version of the original Mark I model, they were more mobile and equipped for close-quarters combat. With reinforced steel plating and hydraulic limbs and one of several armaments, the Behemoths were formidable in close-quarters combat, capable of withstanding significant damage while delivering relentless firepower against armored adversaries. In addition to their mechanized assets, the task force deployed an array of advanced military equipment tailored for the extreme Antarctic environment. This included armored transport vehicles for secure movement across treacherous terrains, heavy machine guns mounted on mobile platforms for sustained firepower, and robust communication systems to maintain coordination. Supporting these assets was an attached battalion from the International Counter-Automata Division, the military arm of the International Automata Intelligence Agency. This elite unit, led by none other than revered Lieutenant Colonel Luis Camaglio, specialized in countering intelligent mechanical threats, bringing tactical expertise and specialized training to the mission. Their presence significantly enhanced the task force's operational capabilities, ensuring a coordinated and efficient approach to the challenges posed by the Antarctic terrain and potential adversaries. With the tunnels sealed in the aftermath of the Palmer Land expedition, the task force initiated the preliminary reconnaissance phase. Utilizing mechanical surveillance units equipped with ground-penetrating radar and thermal scanners, they conducted extensive scans of the Antarctic surface to identify potential entry points into the subterranean tunnel network below. Based on the scan data, a tunnel close to Mount Stevenson was selected due to its relatively close proximity to the surface. Deployment of the heavy-duty boring machine, Goliath 1, commenced. This huge drill tirelessly carved through the thick ice and rock, its powerful machinery breaking new ground for the mission. Coordinated efforts were essential as support units managed logistics, maintained the machine's operation, and provided security against any unforeseen threats lurking beneath the surface. After several hours, the drilling concluded, leaving a fresh access tunnel into the subterranean complex below. The moment the task force had been anticipating had finally arrived. The moment they would make their entrance. An initial recon team was assembled, consisting of specialized armored vehicles and accompanied by a squad of the new British behemoths, ready to confront any threat they might face. The passage stretched approximately 600 meters before intersecting with an existing tunnel. As the armored personnel carriers advanced, tension mounted. The usual hum of engines and hushed communications was interrupted by unsettling sounds echoing from deeper within. The sounds of someone crying out for help. Caution gripped the team. But who could already be down here? The possibility of a survivor after all this time seemed improbable. Yet, they couldn't ignore it. Perhaps the Automatons had kept prisoners from the expedition. Or maybe, just maybe, someone had survived down here against all odds, remaining hidden in the shadows of this frozen underworld. As they approached the junction, the sound of a distressed man was unmistakable, although the source of his plea was unclear. The long, empty tunnels acted like an echo chamber, bouncing off their surfaces and making audio tracking practically impossible. The APCs formed a defensive line at the tunnel intersection, as the behemoth accompanying them took up sentry positions, their optical and infrared sensors scanning the tunnels for hidden threats or signs of an ambush. And that was when they saw him. As members of the task force had proceeded up the right-hand tunnel, it opened up into a large natural cavern. At the far end stood what appeared to be an ancient relic or machine, made up of two connected spheres. On top of them was the figure of a man, seemingly connected to the object via an array of wires and components directly attached to his skull. He was motionless and silent for the best part, but would cry out for help every few minutes, a shrill terror in his voice that felt unnatural in comparison to his stillness. What was this thing that he had been connected to? The strange glyphs that covered its surface resembled those pictured in images and footage brought back by survivors of the Palmer Land tragedy. And upon closer inspection, it appeared the shell of the man they were looking at was Isaac Wells. The discovery of Wells sent a ripple of shock through the task force. The lead researcher of the ill-fated Palmer Land expedition was presumed lost, yet here he was, connected to a peculiar machine deep beneath the Antarctic ice. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, commanders decided to send a message to the surface immediately. With radios of little help at such depths, Corporal James Miller and Private Robert Thompson were dispatched to relay the unexpected discovery. Mounting quad bikes They prepared for the swift journey back, oblivious to the fact that this order would inadvertently be their saving grace. As the team discussed the feasibility and likelihood of successfully extracting wells from this mysterious device, engineers moved cautiously toward the apparatus, assessing its unusual composition while medics prepared to provide immediate aid. But these preparations would not last long. While examining the device, a clearly audible series of clicks, followed by a low-frequency hum, began to emanate, growing louder with each passing moment. The air grew warmer, and a sense of imminent danger gripped the team. Realizing something was amiss, commanders ordered an immediate evacuation. But, without warning, a blinding flash of light erupted from the machine, followed by a massive shock wave that tore through the cavern. The explosion was catastrophic. Those closest to the epicenter were vaporized instantly. Debris and scorching heat surged through the tunnels, melting ice and rock alike from the sheer intensity. Those who avoided the inferno still suffered severe burns and injuries from the residual heat and rapid temperature change. As medics tended to the injured and commanders attempted to re-establish order, it became clear the explosion had devastating consequences. The structural integrity of this section of tunnels was likely compromised, and the task force suffered significant losses. But as they scrambled to deal with the fallout of this catastrophe, the British and American servicemen were dealt yet another heavy blow. Urgent communications had came in from the coastal bases, and through the crackle of the radio static came a dire message. They were under attack. As sirens rang across the frozen Antarctic wastes, soldiers stationed at the coastal base camps rushed to man their defenses. It seems that while the contingent had been preparing to enter the subterranean tunnels below, the automatons had been orchestrating their own entrance. Moments after the explosion rocked the tunnels, the automatons launched their attack, capitalizing on the contingent's split forces and the ensuing chaos caused by their trap. The automatons' initial assault was both swift and methodical, attacking in large numbers from multiple directions to overwhelm the contingent's defenses. They moved quickly to establish forward positions and suppress the defenders' fire. Despite their age, these old American Automata Corps models performed surprisingly well and remained in good condition. Some featured advanced chassis and weapon systems and indicated that the automatons had continued to develop independently, a worrying development indeed. Targeting key observation points and stockpiles, the automatons aimed to disrupt the soldiers' ability to coordinate their response. This strategy also posed a threat of weaponizing the contingent's own resources, potentially undermining their sustainability in the region if the conflict prolonged. Alongside these older adversaries from 1913 were towering black machines unlike anything the men had ever seen, made of a dark and highly reflective material and covered in markings that appeared ancient in origin. They were clearly of advanced design, with sleek and streamlined builds far more efficient and agile than the automatons utilized by the task force, with some instances sporting unique variations in their form and armaments that further diversified their combat abilities and suggested there was far more going on below the surface than humanity could ever have imagined. Antarctica was a continent long deemed devoid of life, and until the recent expedition was of little interest to many of the world's governments. Never had we considered that at some point in Earth's history, intelligent beings had built structures and machines far more advanced than modern civilizations. But who had made these machines? And how long had they been here below the Arctic wastes before they were joined by these rogue automata that escaped the US conflict in 1913. As the automatons attempted to capitalize on their advantage, the task force found themselves increasingly overwhelmed by their assault, with many of the forward trenches now under enemy occupation. Recognizing the critical situation, commanders made the decisive call to deploy 2 of their Mark I behemoths, massive mechanized combat walkers standing approximately 20 feet tall, and were the hulking older brothers of the newer Mark V's. These formidable machines had been held in reserve due to their rarity and cost, and were not well adapted to the Antarctic environment, but the dire circumstances necessitated their immediate mobilization. The arrival of the Mark I's on the battlefield was a turning point. Their imposing presence and immense firepower provided the task force with the means to counter the advanced automatons, their heavy weaponry targeting the enemy's larger mechanized units and drawing enemy fire. With their support, the task force began to regain lost ground. Soldiers in the trenches rallied, coordinating their efforts with the mechanized giants to push back the invading forces and take back the trench lines they had established on arrival. While the task force worked at pushing back the rogue automatons, back at the tunnel, the losses sustained had been significant, with a number of men, automatons, and vehicles either eviscerated in the initial blast or entombed in the aftermath. The detachment had done what they could, and after concluding their rescue and recovery attempts, they prepared to make their departure back to reinforce their allies. It was approximately 25 kilometers from the drill site to the forward trenches, and after coordinating with those leading the defense, it was decided they would attempt to flank the attacking automatons upon their arrival, cutting off attempts at enemy retreat and catching those still fighting in a deadly crossfire. With the men loaded into their vehicles and the remaining mechanized units awaiting orders, they set off back towards the coast, forming a tight convoy and remaining vigilant as they made their way across the endless expanse of white. Those on board sat quietly for the majority of the journey, shaken by earlier events and eager to avenge their fallen brothers, while others discussed the implications of what they had found. The fact that the automatons were now setting traps, and clever ones at that, utilizing technology able to hijack a living human being in order to be used as bait, was, quite frankly, chilling. They suspected this was unlikely to be the handiwork of the relics of war from the US, but instead the doing of whatever ancient power existed on this barren continent. But as they continued their advance towards the Antarctic coastline, the convoy ran into another unexpected hindrance. It seems that several of the automata accompanying the convoy had come to a sudden halt. Technicians accompanying the detachment were quickly tasked with diagnosing the cause of the sudden immobilization, and got to work carrying out a range of checks and recalibrations on components vital for automaton functionality. But initial assessments left technicians baffled, to say the least. While the technicians continued their work, the officers convened to assess the situation. The possibility of a systemic malfunction or external interference was concerning. It was at his point a young British ICAD lieutenant by the name of Martin Healy suggested they dispose of the unresponsive units and continue on towards the combat zone, unwilling to risk malfunctioning machines jeopardizing their mission, while the detachment's commanding officer, U.S. Army Major Joe Hansen, insisted on bringing them back to base for repairs, emphasizing the value of the assets and the losses already sustained. But this was something Healy would simply not accept. The International Counter-Automata Division, commonly known as ICAD, was an elite paramilitary organization established by the International Automata Intelligence Committee shortly after its own foundation in the winter of 1914, providing humanity with another failsafe against the risks posed by the advancement of mechanical intelligence and the autonomous machines being developed and utilized in industries and military sectors worldwide. The formation of such a unit was deemed a vital component in maintaining order and ensuring humanity's dominance following the rise of the Automatons in the United States back in 1913. Those recruited were the best of the best, hand-picked from special forces units across the globe and trained extensively in counter-automata tactics, advanced weaponry, and mechanical neutralization techniques. They were the true bane of any unruly automatons whose guillotine devices had malfunctioned or been removed illegally. Much of their time was spent dealing with automata-related incidents and conflicts, ranging from isolated malfunctions and guillotine failures to neutralizing black market automaton dealers and organized crime groups that used modified automatons in their operations. Over time, these operational demands fostered a strong anti-automata sentiment among ICAD members. Preferring human intervention over machine reliance, ICAD operatives adopted a shoot first, ask questions later approach when engaging with automatons, minimizing risks and prioritizing human safety. This prejudice and skepticism were widely regarded as justified, given ICAD's history and their experiences dealing with the threats posed by the rapidly growing numbers of automata worldwide and the related underground operations that exploded following regulations imposed by the IAIC. Following a heated exchange between the officers, the decision was eventually made to neutralize the inactive automatons, with Healy apparently stating he would personally pay for a whole squad of new tin cans if Hansen would stop thinking about a promotion and start thinking about their objectives. Orders were given and explosive charges were placed on each of the 4 units. They wasted no time detonating the charges remotely from a safe distance before hastily resuming their trek. And with only another 10 kilometers between them and their allies, those en route faced the reality that their battle would soon commence. Back at the trench lines, the tables had turned, and the task force had made significant progress in taking back ground lost during the initial assault. ICAD officer Luis Camaglio had spearheaded a counteroffensive, leading his men back through the trenches in an attempt to rout any automatons that remained dug in, while British and US forces maintained the defensive line. The deployment of the Mark I behemoths had significantly enhanced the task force's offensive capabilities, and with reinforcements also inbound, things were looking extremely optimistic. But those that had followed Camaglio into the trenches sensed that something was not quite right. As Camaglio's unit delved deeper into the winding trenches, a disquieting stillness enveloped them. The usual clatter of machinery felt distant, replaced by an eerie silence that gnawed at their nerves. Along their path, they stumbled upon their own automatons, stalwart machines that should have been holding the line, now standing immobile, their optics dimmed, yet bearing no signs of being critically damaged. Among them was one of the Mark V behemoths, as motionless as the rest, but somewhat aware of its surroundings, its thermal and electromagnetic sensors visibly scanning the environment for hidden threats and would-be aggressors. Usually, ICAD operatives would have suspected a faulty component or guillotine malfunction as the primary cause of their ailment. But with the removal of the guillotine devices before their departure, and their components seemingly intact, the reason for their sudden paralysis was rather baffling. But baffled as they may be, the task force would not be granted the luxury of time required for further investigation, as the communications lines erupted into chaos. It seemed the significance of their discovery would soon echo across the battlefield, for across the radio waves came a truly terrifying message. Our automatons are defecting. I repeat, our automatons are defecting. Requesting urgent reinforcements at the coastline. They are attacking the fleet. I repeat, they are attacking the fleet.